English. Dead. All right, so thanks so much for putting your cohorts into the spreadsheet. We grabbed, and I think Evan Minty was still polishing his cohorts as of 8 or 9 p.m. Yesterday, so that we commend him for his excitement and dedication. And we grabbed the cohorts. We grabbed the cohorts last night, and there were 56 of them that required rerun. And as of now, I see that it's still going. So we do not necessarily have the new cohort diagnostics to look at, but when we do have it, we of course will communicate with all the study leads with an updated link saying that it's ready for you to view. And I guess before we go into the questions and addressing any unresolved issues, something I wanted to reiterate in terms of our subsequent progress. So end of February is very close. We are now at February 26th, so it's really 2 days left. And by the end of this month, the inspiration was that we will finish all of the cohorts that are needed for the study leads, or at least attempt to finish them. And it seems that so far we're on good track. From what I know from the study leads, a lot of them feel good about their cohorts and expect that minor changes in the definitions will bring them to the desired state. So once we get to this point, once we have the cohorts, that's a different meeting. Once we have the cohorts finalized, there is an option for the study leads to go ahead and submit their cohorts to the Phenotype Library. We have in OHDSI this resource called Phenotype Library, which contains the phenotypes submitted by our community members that are available for reuse. So that involves the description of the cohorts. It involves some metadata elements, like, for example, the name of the author and the name of the person who reviewed it. And then, of course, it contains the JSON files that are reproducible. So if that's something of an interest, we highly encourage the study leads to submit their cohorts, because part of our process has been looking at the cohort diagnostics that already satisfies a lot of the criteria for submitting such a cohort to the Phenotype Library. So really, process-wise, it doesn't take much. It just takes indicating an interest, and we can add the cohorts to the library. And the benefit of it, of course, is that other researchers down the line have an ability to reuse your artifacts. One of the things that we found useful in day-to-day work is to compile a short report on the phenotypes we create. And the benefit of it is that once you transition to presentations, publications, disseminating your work in any other way, it's useful to have a document that outlines what you did, what you found, because of course you can imagine that in 6 months, you will not really remember what you did on those phenotypes or what you found. So we find it to be nice practice to write a short summary report. Can be half a page, can be page, doesn't have to be long, and it contains the information that you find useful to remember. So it can be how you created phenotype. Obviously, you guys have clinical descriptions, so that's already done. The report can also contain the details of what you learned on the cohort diagnostics, if you expect any problems with the phenotype, if there are any limitations based on what you saw. That all goes into this report. And again, it usually is nice and brief. And the aim of it is for you not to forget what you've done and what you learned. So I encourage everybody, once you have the cohorts that you feel good about, to compile the short reports, and then also consider contributing to the Phenotype Library. That was the whole spiel about the next steps. And let's see if anybody has any questions on their studies, on process, on anything else. And I think I see more note takers than actual people, which we will take as a success, because it means that all of the needed help was already provided. All right, out of the study leads, I see Vlad, Tanya, Oleg, Evan, Michelle, Masha. Do you guys have any questions, comments, concerns on your cohorts or studies in general?
I don't have any questions, but I just wanted to thank you a lot for your help.
Oh, that's our pleasure.
It's basically the same for me. So the last session about the cohort diagnostics was very helpful for us, and then we made some changes to the definitions.
Yeah, we'll see what kind of impact it has once we have the
Actually,
results.
it could be a good question. So we submitted new cohorts. I mean, this part of the test cohort, so we can compare them with the previous version of the diagnostics. I think that was the right approach, because if we just made changes to the cohort, that we would lose the previous results.
Yeah, it will be overwritten.
Yeah. Okay. So it was the right one.
Well, for example, I did not create new cohorts because the only thing that I found that was slightly concerning in the pneumonia cohort is that there is still this 5% of 05, so 0.5% of patients who have ventilator associated pneumonia on the day 0. And while I do not believe it has any meaningful impact on the study results, I thought that maybe from the optics perspective, when we were to publish this work and we will provide the list of ICD-10, ICD-9 codes in the supplements, if they see ventilator-associated pneumonia, that will trigger the reviewers, regardless of how few patients we have in the cohort. So the only change that I did is that I added that one ICD-9 code that slipped away from me, ventilator-associated pneumonia. I added it as an exclusion on day 0. And because I already know what my expectation is in terms of changing the cohort, which is really nothing because I'm removing 0.5% of patients. Based on that, I just went on with modifying my cohort instead of creating another one. But of course, if you don't know what the expected impact of your changes is, yeah, it's nice to do it the way you did it, which is create a second cohort. I'm just looking at my notes. Yes, Evan.
So I'd feel some silence, and I don't know if anybody else has noticed it, but I was trying to update cohorts yesterday and noticed that we finally may have managed to overwhelm Demo Atlas a little bit. So a lot of my attempted loads would just bring up an empty cohort table. Not neither here nor there, but I guess just trying to figure out timelines. I mean, I imagine that that's because a lot of people are hitting it at the same time, and maybe it's, you're running into some performance issues. But if there's, like, for instance, there are some changes we'd like to make across a large set of cohorts, in particular things like observation time, but that would require, loading it up, clicking on it, making a change across across each of those ones, and iterating that change all the way through the collection. What I know we want to have all these done by February, end of February, but I'm just wondering if part of this is just kind of acute load on Demo Atlas with the number of people that are kind of working under that deadline. And if there's some things there that we want to change later on, is that still a possibility? I think for the most part, like for instance, with that observation time requirement, for the most part, when we look at when I look at the amount of time that is already existing without that requirement, like a lot of them have reasonable amounts of observation time already. And so I think we can make assessments based on the cohorts that are there, even if we don't have the 365-day requirement. So it lets us do the work now, but ideally, I think, in any study, it might be nice to show the cohort that has the same observation time requirement as the study would, so that the distributions of characteristics are the same as what would be kind of configured by the analysis. So that might be something we can do later. Like I don't know. I just want to throw kind of a consideration like that out there in case there are ways we can space out some of the demands on Demo Atlas.
So there are actually two things. One thing is that if you want to change something that is very programmatic, such as changing observation period consistently across all cohorts, you don't really even need to. Well, for the process we are following, you do need to change the atlas because we're grabbing the cohorts directly from atlas. But in the actual study, you would not need to go into atlas and click buttons. You can simply just change the JSON files, because you can quite literally search for observation period and replace it. And there are also packages, something like, it's not cohort generator, it's something else.
Martin Lavalley's package,
yes.
Right? Yeah. I can't, now that is escaping me as well, but I know which one you mean. I haven't.
CapR, is that the one?
What was that, Andrew?
That CapR, one of his
CapR,
cohort packages is
right.
CapR, yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. I haven't played with it a ton. Can you create a pipeline into Demo Atlas with CapR? Like an API?
Well, it's from what I know, it's fully R-based, so it doesn't really. The assumption there is that it allows you to scale your process really nicely, but from what I know, it's purely in RStudio.
Yeah.
No, I actually don't know much about the tool either, because I've never used it. But that would be like something to explore if there is just the same thing you want to do consistently across many cohorts.
Yeah.
But that was one thing. Second thing is that in the regular study, you obviously are not bounded by the February, right? And of course, if you find yourself in a situation where you want to make tweaks down the road, like for example, in March, there will be more talks about the data for use. I'm sorry, I will just make a slight detour here. For example, Chen asked this question of, okay, we want to study osteonecrosis of jaw, and we created a cohort, but the cohort gets 0 patients on GMDC. The hypothesis there was that the definition misses ICD-10 codes, not ICD-10-CM used in the US, but ICD-10 codes used in GMDC for osteonecrosis of jaw. Now, that assumption was correct. There were no ICD-10 codes captured, but the bigger problem is that ICD-10 doesn't have a specific code for osteonecrosis of jaw. It has code for osteonecrosis of other sites, osteonecrosis of arm, but not really jaw. So now he has this choice of either expanding his definition to say, okay, well, we'll just capture any osteonecrosis as opposed to jaw, or he has a choice of saying, well, GMDC doesn't seem to be fit for use for what I'm trying to study, because the ontology used there simply does not provide enough granularity to study exactly what I want. So this is what this whole notion of data for use, fitness for use, is, I think, what Claire will talk a lot in March. And there will be an opportunity to also learn there from more data sources and what happens there. Even outside of, so that's March, and then even outside of March, of course, there will be an opportunity to refine the cohorts. Really, the caveat is that we, as a small but mighty team, set up a dedicated time in February to really help you guys. And then, of course, as the time moves on, oh, well, I'll be on vacation in April. So if you want me to run something, April is not a good time because I will not be there. So the consideration of that sort. And of course, as you can imagine, we will figure out the way to help you. It's just the question will be how fast you want some changes, how many databases you want to look at for these changes. Like, do you want just the simple counts that I can give you right now? Do you want something more elaborate? All of these things. But of course, the bottom line is that we will be able to change stuff. We just want the most of the work to be done in February.
Right. No, fair enough. That makes sense. Thanks.
There was something else I wanted to say about this. There was interesting conversation, a general conversation in the steering committee about the Phenotype February. I actually wanted to get your opinions on it, which is, you as a study leads, did you feel that this sequence was the correct sequence in the way that usually we start with protocols, write everything up, thought everything through, and then we go into phenotyping? It oftentimes is the case that once you get to phenotyping, you realize that your design, your core design returns 0 counts, so you need to go back to the protocol and change stuff. But in general, we were wondering if this sequence makes sense of you going straight into phenotyping and then writing the protocols down the road. So if you have thoughts on that, that would be nice. Also, I see that Andrew has his hand, and Oleg.
I do have thoughts on that, but I'd love to have other people answer first, and then I have a question really kind of, about the prior topic. But yeah, I think on the steering committee, expressed my opinion that I think these are not usually linear processes, and that it's probably useful to have accommodations for the typical iteration of the type that you described, where you're learning about things that impact the design as you're doing the phenotyping, and having some strategy for, I guess, pre-planning what that set of iterations looks like, and then a criterion for saying, here's a final version that, is taking into account all of the data inspection and work, and we're sticking with this. I think there's an implicit assumption that it is a fairly linear process, that it isn't quite reflective of reality now. And it's amazing that the community does this at scale across all these different projects at once and so on. So I think there have to be some accommodations to the scale there. But I think ideally, when we want the most valid evidence at the end, we want to accommodate those typical needs to improve and adjust as stuff is learned. And that's a nonlinear process. But those are my 2 cents. And I'm going to keep my hand raised because I do have another question about the prior topic of what to do for things like the GPRC, but I'll let others respond to the rest of the stuff.
Yeah, I just want to say that the timing was not perfect, and from the vocabulary team perspective, because we had very high workload in February, and lots of team members wanted to participate in both. So for us, it was not the best February, not the best February of my life, honestly. And
I feel you.
This is the first part, and the second, I think that so to be more serious here, it will make in future, I mean, it will make sense to do protocols first. So this approach, really, I like this approach more, just because inside the teams we're still discussing the clinical ideas, and based on that, sometimes we rush to make certain decisions, and we maybe add something, maybe reduce something, so we change scope during the phenotyping, and this is, in my opinion, not the best strategy. So if we prepare the protocol at first, then we would be sure that we only need these phenotypes and we will not change them during the process. Maybe we can go back and forth, but yeah, having protocol, I think, would help us be more consistent and be more stable in certain terms. Plus release activity. Yeah, so these two concerns from my side.
Yeah, I'm hearing what you're saying.
I mean, I think that all works. I think what we maybe this part of just me kind of having a work-life balance that makes it hard to always be plugged in. If this becomes a predictable pattern, fantastic. You know what I mean? And we kind of know in the summer that this is coming, you know, and then you know, fleshing out some of those things further in advance becomes a little bit easier. You can kind of stage the work. So I'm a big fan of kind of the reorganization in how we do our work along these kind of timelines that are meant for evidence, you know, at the end of the day, evidence dissemination. And I'm hoping that remains like a consistent pattern so that we can plan a little bit further ahead just amongst our own work groups, et cetera. So we're better prepared when these types of opportunities come up, because they are tough to sometimes fit in these sprints because other things just exist in February that are otherwise hard to work around. The only other piece that I'd throw in there is that the other tension that we probably want to make more explicit is, you know, with our phenotyping, how much are we aiming, you know, this discussion comes up all the time, how much are we aiming for a use case specific phenotype versus one that's more generalizable? And so the only, you know, that tension kind of plays into the back and forth with the protocol. Depending on what your intended use case is, you could probably make a different phenotype that might, you know, might be okay within that clinical question, but when deployed for broader use, has, you know, inherits some limitations because you were only looking at it within a certain distribution of patients, and so that's one that kind of came up in our own work, and one that we probably want to explore as a group more, because we don't want to necessarily have, you know, 80 different phenotypes of AKI that are suited to different, you know, to different clinical circumstances.
So for your AKI example, what exactly did you feel you needed to change from the existing phenotypes to fit your use case?
For us, and I think this is probably a useful generalizable change, we wanted to disentangle an outcome of AKI with dialysis from AKI without dialysis, just because it's such a, you know, a marker of severity, that combining those endpoints together, we lose too much information. But the other thing that came up is that, for instance, if we were looking at purely a, you know, known hospitalized cohort that's post-surgery, I wouldn't worry about dialysis for any other reason, right? So you can use dialysis for toxicology reasons, other reasons, and you know, you could make the case that you don't have to specify that you need to be using dialysis for AKI if you're using that as an endpoint post-surgery, because if you're getting dialysis after a surgical episode, it's almost certainly going to be for AKI. But in more general use case, you would want to specify that the dialysis is for AKI if you're using it as an outcome, right? And we might take a bit of a power hit in kind of continuing to maintain the requirement of that AKI code, but I think, you know, we kept it in part because we want to promote reuse of these phenotypes. And so that was it's just something that came up, but that, you know, it relates to that conversation around iterating back and forth with your study design and the phenotypes, that we want to also make sure that we have a balance, a counterbalance of trying to maximize reuse of the things that we're building.
I think your assumption, from what I'm hearing, your assumption here is that when you say, well, in our cohort, in our study design, if you're getting dialysis after surgery, it's almost always because of AKI. So you're willing to entertain the idea of skipping the AKI diagnosis and just going for dialysis. The caveat there is, so it's a very interesting observation that I wrote down to think more about it in general. But a very specific reaction that I had is that actually AKI is coded very nicely. Dialysis is coded worse. Especially like if you look at the EHRs, there is this work by Emerge. They created a really, really elaborate, huge algorithm for figuring out the stages of CKD and also AKI and AKI with or without dialysis. And there they had to use all sorts of codes for arteriovenous access for dialysis, because the dialysis codes were, for example, not present in Columbia EHR as just a code that explicitly says dialysis. So instead they had to go for proxies for the accesses for dialysis catheters. So to me, it's not necessarily clear. I'm not necessarily sure that dialysis will be coded better than AKI. And if there are cohorts to compare, I would be also very much interested in looking into that to see if my assumption holds.
Yeah, no, and this wasn't an empiric thing based on what we were seeing in the data, because this was all kind of beforehand, before knowing, what that kind of reliability is. I'm just saying, as a general use, as in general,
Yeah.
if you're focused very much on your use case and that distribution of patient characteristics that exist in your clinical question, then you can make different decisions in phenotyping, and that there's a counterbalance in terms of trying to maximize reuse in all, in more broad circumstances.
Yeah. That part I got. That part I can clearly see the trade-off.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really don't have any kind of immediate response to this, because I think you're bringing up a bigger question that exists in the community, which is which part of the definition is part of the study design, which one is part of the actual clinic phenotype definition. And then, yes, what you said, how do you balance them out? So we'll just made a note to think about that more.
I can't help but weigh in on the broader philosophical question of whether we're trying to maximize generalizability or whether we're trying to maximize correspondence to some version of the truth that we have faith in. And I think variability across different definitions as they get implemented in different sites is treated one way when we're talking about phenotype definitions, and it's totally different for the exactly equivalent algorithmic task when we're trying to do something like, say, here's how this NLP algorithm performs. We know there's so much variability in sites that we expect it to vary, that you need to tweak that. You're not even going to begin to write a paper where you're doing exactly the same thing. And so that expectation of variability being accommodated in how you're classifying people, identical task, classification task, thinking about it differently when we talk about it as phenotype definition and the utility of allowing that variability to maximize the value. And so I think that's my frame on the broader question. If it's all right, I'm going to ask, because it relates to NLP, it's a segue. Your prior instance of the decision faced by not finding the data needed to do necrosis of the jaw, is there, as a part of Phenotype February and in general the guidance you're providing, any consideration of the use of things like NLP to go get that information where you don't see it in structured data, and any connection for people who want to follow up and say this might be available in our data set, we just aren't getting it from our structured data? Is there any kind of option for people who are facing that choice? And I'm not saying there should be, but because I'm doing all kinds of work around that, extending the data beyond coded data or structured data, is that part of the plan or is that not? And it's fine either way.
It's not in the current scope simply because I think the expectation is that if somebody's doing NLP, they will be populating the standard tables with the artifacts. So if you, for example, extract dialysis from notes, the way you would translate it, you would put, I guess, the artifacts into the node NLP table, but then you also should be putting it in the condition occurrence table so that the network can use it. As of now, we're not leveraging the node NLP in the current form, nor I think, although I'm not too much in the space, I'm not sure we have conventions around it. But if somebody comes in and says, hey, this is of interest, this is what I've been doing, and this is what I want to try, of course, we'll support it. But it's not a part of streamlined process.
I mean, there are conventions for it. I think we've demonstrated in cancer how to do it, and using the type concept idea of derive that indicates the NLP. I just mean, is there something for folks who want to help support people who want to get the last mile from the data? And in any event, just follow up with me about that if there is. I'd like to help facilitate it if there is any kind of pathway option for those folks.
So if there is somebody who's interested, we can direct them to you.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe Chen will watch it and we'll be like, okay, I want to get to this osteonecrosis in jaw. Okay, I wrote it down. Definitely, we'll make a note. I think Oleg has. I'm not sure if that's an old hand or a new hand.
No, it's a bug. I can't lower it for some reason.
Okay, but Tanya had a hand and she hasn't spoken yet.
Yeah, I had. Hands are bugged today. So I wanted to say something along the lines of what Oleg said, actually. So if we're talking about like feedback and how we felt it worked, so for me, some kind of, not maybe protocol specifically, but plan of what we plan to study, not in terms of like clinical idea, but in terms of like how it actually works, would be probably a very helpful intermediate step between the overall idea, description, and the phenotyping. Because like being primarily a clinician and less a like dedicated like statistician or something, like it is very easy to start thinking about separate entities as phenotypes. Like we had some experience in our small team when talking about like Masha's phenotype and so on, about like what do you consider a phenotype? Is it a concept set representing some complex entity? Is it a full cohort? What should be in a cohort? Should you combine indication and exposure and so on? So some kind of protocol, not necessarily with all the statistical algorithms we're going to be using, but just like arrows and boxes and what combines with what, would be actually a good step, I think, at least for me.
So are you thinking about a generic? Okay, are you thinking about that it would be good if you created the semi protocol beforehand, or are you thinking about some sort of educational sessions where we talk in general how to approach a study, how to think about pieces, how the study progresses? So specific to you, or just education in general?
Well, the correct answer is probably both. So I believe we do have some recordings from previous symposia about the form of about the study and general aspects, and maybe spending not maybe a full week of February, small month, but like a couple of days when everyone is thinking specifically how they would do that in their study. Would be
I'm hearing you. Well, you know what? There's also a wonderful new leads in the early stage researchers work group, which I have very high hopes for. So what you said also made me think that maybe there is an opportunity for a disjoint or maybe joint, who knows, set of sessions on their side where they talk more about the study steps in general for the early stage researchers, for those who And when I say early stage, I mean for those who do not identify themselves as researchers full-time. But that probably would be more generic. So maybe we will talk to them about this thought of maybe there is a possibility for training. I'm sure they will not like more work, but maybe they will be interested about the idea. But also I wrote down what you said about the having time in between dry January where you study the guidelines and Phenotype February where you go into phenotyping, having time to write out like a preliminary plan that I got. Yes, that's a very, very good point. Maybe it is part of January. I will not be subscribing yet to the notion that this will be a repeated effort, but if it is a repeated effort over years, that's definitely something we need to take into account, for sure. And that, I think Kevin came to this office hours. Kevin, you're all set. Your cohorts are already in the Phenotype Library, as you know. Kevin is just
yes, but I mean, I go back to what Evan and Andrew were talking about earlier in the different use cases of phenotypes, right? A phenotype where you simply want to know, I need to know that you have the disease because you're indicated for treatment or outcome, may be a very different phenotype than the phenotype of, I need to know that today is the first day that you ever had an event of interest. And I also do think that these phenotypes, while we say once you're in the OMOP common data model, the one phenotype to rule them all, there is still the data provenance piece of things and why and how data was collected. One code of diabetes in CPRD is enough for me to believe that you have diabetes. In the US data source, you need to see what, 2, and you need to see some treatment, whatever. I still think that there's enough database heterogeneity and heterogeneity across the use cases in the application. We had that in the IBD space where if I truly want to know today is the first day that you had IBD and follow you forward in a long period of time, the Lewis algorithm suggests you need 4 or 5 years of follow-up beforehand to make sure that somebody hadn't relapsed and that this is truly a new diagnosis. If you really want to get specific, if you ever want to have a population of people at risk for appendicitis, in theory, you need to remove everybody who had their appendix removed. This is a very challenging thing, right? Because I had mine removed several years ago. If I changed insurance, I come into a new insurance plan, they have no idea that I am not at risk for this outcome, right? We struggle with this in the United States, just with the fragmentation of our healthcare system, given that everything that happens in the early 60s gets thrown away as you then join Medicare, and we have to wait a year for us to collect this beautiful baseline data that indicates what all the diseases that you must have had in your entire life based on that first year of life, first year of 65 to 66, where we then begin to follow you. So I still think that understanding the underlying data that feeds into these phenotypes is absolutely critical in any of this stuff. And then I don't believe that there's going to be a phenotype for every single condition that will just, once it's in OMOP, it will work. Sorry, soapbox, I'll step back down.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Although so you're conflating two things together, which is one phenotype for all databases and another is one phenotype for all use cases. I don't think anybody claims that we are building one phenotype for all use cases because your flexibility in terms of measurement error and then index event misspecification is different based on your use case. So there is some thought there, and you're in all these conversations too. The databases we haven't. I don't want to say we haven't really fully. Okay, we haven't really fully built a solution for accounting for differences in different databases. That would be a I think an accurate answer. I think Claire is thinking a lot about it this year. So maybe the hope is that they will come up with the innovative means on how to account for what you said about superiority. I'm not in the space, so I obviously don't have good solutions, but your point is very valid.
I will tell you, I use the how often results just to figure out what database I'm going to retire to, because the how often database that has the lowest incidence of all the diseases that I'm concerned about, that's where I'm moving to. However, knowing data, know that that is absolutely not true. Being in a database does not prevent me from getting cancer, although I will be moving to whatever that database is that has the lowest cancer rate, because it surely must be protected.
Mhm.
We get these massive ranges of incident rates and we go, truth must be in there somewhere.
So
If
you're staying
database
with the
prevented
US.
disease, we would all move to that database, period. Full stop.
That's funny. All right. Are there any other thoughts that people would like to bring up?
Oh no, I silenced a crowd.
No. It's like we actually, there is no expectation that we will fill the whole hour, because I think most of the work has already been done, and now we're waiting for the cohort diagnostics. So we wanted to check with all the study lists that they're good, and it seems that we're all good. So there is no need to fill the whole hour. Okay, dokie. Well,
Sounds like a coffee break.
yes, if you have any questions, all of you guys know what to do, which is send us an email or shoot us in Teams. And once we have the new cohort diagnostics, we will communicate that with you, Tim.
Ask one question, and you should just feel free to follow up in a separate call, because I don't want to diffuse the focus that you have on